If you've ever been to a beach, you've probably seen some things that have washed ashore. Shells, weird rocks, seaweed, and maybe the occasional jellyfish. But these are not the only things that end up on beaches. Sometimes you get some real weird stuff, and you wonder how it even ended up in the ocean in the first place. Beaches in the state of Washington aren't known to be all that inviting. They're typically cold and rocky, not to mention it rains most of the time. It's not that unusual to see driftwood washed ashore in this state, but it is definitely unusual to see an entire tree. This piece of driftwood is actually so big, it's known as a drift log. How does a drift log even end up in the ocean? Well, it requires a specific set of circumstances, and it can't happen just anywhere. 3 things are needed: really strong winds, high tides, and, well, trees. This means that Washington, a state full of trees right on the coast, is the perfect place. This log was found following a powerful winter storm all the way back in 2010. What many assume happened is strong winds knocked the trees down into the flooded forest rivers, which then carried the trees out to the sea before a high tide ultimately carried it to shore. The locals don't seem to mind though, as these drift logs make for great picture opportunities. Seeing a giant tree on the beach is not any cause for concern. It's not going to do anything to you. It's probably just going to sit there. Seeing a 13-foot missile on the beach, on the other hand, would be pretty alarming. In 2012, this huge missile was found on a beach on the Isle of Harris, part of the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. Upon discovery of the missile, several people came to the area to take photos next to it before authorities could arrive. Personally, I think if I ever saw a missile sitting on a beach, I would probably want to keep my distance. The missile most likely came from the Deep Sea Range, although there has never been any official confirmation. The Deep Sea Range is a Royal Air Force missile range in the Outer Hebrides. It was originally built in 1957 by the Ministry of Defense to test nuclear missiles for use during the Cold War. Building the Deep Sea Range was so controversial that there was actually a movie made about how much people protested it being built called Rockets Galore. In the end, the missile was taken care of by the military without incident. Back in 2017, beachgoers in England got a fun surprise when massive plastic pipes washed ashore right in front of them. In total, 12 plastic pipes, all 8 feet in diameter, washed ashore. To give you an idea as to just how large these pipes were, the longest of them was 1,547 feet, or 480 meters long. They were supposed to be shipped off to Algeria for an industrial project, but they fell off the boat. I can only imagine that whoever was in charge of tying these things down got fired after this. The company who made the pipes, Pipelife Norge AS, said that they had been damaged beyond repair. I guess that's what happens when your product falls off of a ship and gets dragged through the ocean. Special personnel had to be brought in to haul them off the beach. At least this story has a kind of nice ending, since they ultimately all were removed from the beach and brought to Denmark for recycling. Naval mines are great if you're trying to stop enemy ships from getting into a certain part of the ocean. They are less great if they end up on a beach where a Florida man could accidentally detonate it. Unlike the missile on the Isle of Harris, this was such a big deal that a whole section of the Florida coastline had to be closed off to the public out of fear that someone might accidentally detonate the device. The mine was about 4 feet in diameter and is said to have just floated up onto the beach one morning near the small town of Lauderdale by the sea. After a short investigation, the sheriff's office identified it as a possible explosive training device. The fact that it was for training sounds good, since you don't want to blow people up during training. The mine was marked as inert, but authorities didn't rule out the possibility of it being active. Better safe than sorry. The discovery of this definitely caused quite a scene, with the police, a bomb squad, and even military officials showing up. Luckily, nobody was injured, and the mine was taken off the beach and onto a trailer so they could drive it away. The beaches soon after filled with vacationers, now that the threat of stepping on a giant mine was no longer there. In 2008, something strange washed up on a beach near Montauk, New York. Naturally, it was dubbed the Montauk Monster because of how strange and terrifying it looked. While nobody actually knows for sure what the Montauk Monster was, there are some theories. Early articles about it speculated that it could be a turtle or some kind of mutated experiment from the nearby Plum Island Animal Disease Center. That might seem far-fetched, but just look at this thing. Something went seriously wrong with it. Larry Penny, a man who worked as the East Hampton Natural Resources Director, said that the monster was in fact a raccoon that was missing the upper jaw. Further investigation proved impossible because the monster's body was gone. An anonymous person who lived nearby said that somebody took it and put it in their backyard. Why you would want to do that is beyond me. The Montauk Monster became a bigger news story than it probably should have. The national media was actually reporting on this at the time. It even featured on an episode of the show Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura and the show Ancient Aliens. There are three main theories as to what this creature may have been. Some thought it was a turtle, but this theory was pretty quickly dismissed. Turtles can't actually just pop their shells off because they're fused with their spines. Other people thought that it was some kind of small dog or some kind of big rodent. William Wise, the director of Stony Brook University's Living Marine Resources Institute, inspected the photo. His conclusion was that the picture was fake, but also said that if it was real, it was probably a dog or coyote that had some kind of disease and had been in the sea for a while. Another scientist, Darren Naish, said that the Montauk Monster was simply a raccoon, one that had decomposed slightly, been damaged by salt water, and had most of its hair and flesh removed. A weird, gross raccoon, but a raccoon nonetheless. An intriguing theory, but ultimately, nobody really knows. This means that, if you want, you can just say that it's an alien, and technically, nobody can prove you wrong. Of all the strange things on this list, this is by far the most fun and also the most useful. There's not much you can do with a giant plastic pipe, for instance, but I can think of plenty of things you can do with 22,000 cases of malt whiskey. One day in 1941, the people living on the island of Eriskay in northern Scotland awoke to find that a ship called the SS Politician had run aground. A wreck wasn't all that unusual at the time, but the cargo was. The people on the island were barely getting by on their wartime rations. So you could imagine their excitement to find 250,000 bottles of whiskey inside the wreck. At night, the locals rowed out to the beached ship and climbed inside using rope ladders. Over the course of a few weeks, they took out hundreds of cases of whiskey. Customs officers soon came after the village, attempting to recover everything they had taken. Fearing this may happen, locals managed to steal and hide so much of it that free whiskey was available in massive quantities on the island for years after. Eventually, the ship totally sank, but the whiskey stayed around. Unfortunately, there can be consequences to getting a free and virtually unlimited amount of hard alcohol. It turned some people into long-term alcoholics. It resulted in a lot of social problems for the little island. To this day, people on the island still come across secret stashes that people buried back in the 1940s to hide from the authorities. Interestingly enough, a movie was made about this incident called Whiskey Galore. Rockets Galore, which I mentioned earlier, is actually the sequel, although they don't actually have much to do with each other in terms of plot. Both movies are Ealing comedies, which is the name that's been given to a series of comedies produced by Ealing Studios after World War II. People were understandably not in the mood for really dark movies post-war, so a lot of light-hearted comedies like Whiskey Galore were made. Whiskey Galore was released in America as well. However, due to laws about the use of alcoholic drink names and titles, it had to be called Tight Little Island. This name sort of makes sense, since the movie is all about the tightly knit community coming together to hide all the whiskey from the government, but it doesn't really have the same punch as the real title. Well, now that you've seen this video, hopefully you'll keep an eye out the next time you're at the beach. You wouldn't want to accidentally step on a mine, a possible alien, or several thousand bottles of whiskey. And with that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.